Climate and social justice are talked about as inseparable. That we have to, and I almost want to go back to when you displayed, that plastic Perrier container. I think one of the things that we just learned over the last couple of days in communities that lost power for more than 20, I happen to live in communities that lost power for a full 72 hours. So at that point, I literally I found an open grocery store and I just grabbed the loaf of bread that looked, just from a casual observance that it was a little bit healthy. It was nowhere near organic bread. It was just whatever, the first thing I found available. So if you kind of extrapolate from that to people who live in frontline communities who have very few resources, that's almost their daily reality. Just without even regard for losing power. They have so few resources. So it's frontline communities that live in economically disadvantaged areas, communities of color. Those are the communities that are most impacted by climate, that are first impacted and most impacted by climate. And there's lots of overlap.
All right, so we're still working on the strategy of the candidates, so I can have an idea, because I feel like I'm not engaged with it. I'm not inspired. I don't feel like it's really even engaging the planet in a, quote, movement that we need. So I'm still trying to understand what it actually is that defines, let's go back to the climate strike.
Okay.
You want to tell me,
okay.
I don't know if maybe you can go back to that article again.
I can.
Because you were saying that, tell me about the climate strike. What were the goals? And I really want to not feel so
So I'll just
separated.
give you a little summary that David Wallace Wells included here. So in March, well, I'm going back to March already. That was kind of the first big international quote-unquote climate strike. So the whole thing began when Greta would, on Fridays, starting August 20th, I think it was, of 2018, literally just over a year ago, all by herself, because she wasn't a very social person. She's even said that if she was a different kind of person who worked easily and well with other people, she might have tried to start an organization, but she didn't feel that that was her strength. So she just did this individual protest by sitting in front of the Swedish legislature with a little sign, and that began, and then suddenly that pictures of her started to spread and inspired lots of people. So let me see, I'll even give it a summary. This is not the climate strike that happened in September
of this past year.
Right.
But do you think that
this is an example, and I think it does talk about the movement itself in a way.
Okay.
So in March, an estimated 1.4 million school children followed Greta's lead, walking out of classrooms and marching in cities and towns around the world. 300,000 students in Germany, all over the world, 200,000 in Italy, 150,000 in Quebec, even in places like Namibia and Ghana, Taipei, the Philippines, Edinburgh, Dublin, Sydney, Prague, etc. But the strikes themselves are only part of what Greta has achieved. This is, I think, important too, because it goes beyond just the strike on one day. This article shows that the fact that she has spoken in many different fora, including Davos, to the US Congress, she's been at the UN. So the writer of this article makes the point that the strikes themselves are only part of what Greta has achieved. And he gives it as an example. In February, the president of the European Commission committed to spending fully a quarter of the EU budget on climate mitigation over 7 years, following a meeting with Greta. And shortly after she visited the British Parliament, its Conservative majority voted to declare a climate emergency. And that's something that is in the air right now in Marin County. Fairfax actually declared a climate emergency. And there's a movement afoot to go to each town, each city, town in Marin County and try to get each of these towns to declare a climate emergency. And then, of course, there's lots of discussion about what are the implications of that.
What
Does it have any real meaning?
I think that's obviously very important. So it's just find it. The whole idea of the 1% versus the 99%.
Right.
seems to be the
Occupy
popular context
Wall
of our
Street.
times. And I've read, I had a copy of Bernie Sanders' Our Revolution to peruse and get a sense of where he was coming from. And I wanted to read about his beliefs of, or where he was going with the Green. I think he's strongly, from what I understand, for the Green New Deal. And just like you say, millions of dollars are being dedicated, perhaps locally, to this emergency plan, or in these European people are going to do a giant commitment of money to a mitigation, whatever that means. And so Bernie says, make no mistake about it, or let's be perfectly clear, because I remember that's how he began his sentence after a few pages in his book describing the whole problem, I think pretty clearly. But let's make no mistake about it. The only reason we have all these problems is the 0.5% of the world that are, refusing to wake up, or I'm not sure exactly what they're refusing. But it just struck me, it just seems to me that 99% of the globe has a lot of power that is not, we're banging our heads against this 1% or the 0.5%. They've got to free up this stuff, but I haven't heard, and God bless Greta, what I love about her particularly is her own willingness to be on a train, to influence her parents so that they no longer fly.
Exactly.
I haven't heard that talking to the 99%. Join me. Join me on the train. Join me in not flying. Join my parents. What can we do? Do we have the power simply by, like, look at our and I also went through the 72-hour blackout, and it was interesting, and it had some elements that were, a little bit roughing it for the average soul who wants a hot shower. Or some of us didn't have hot food at night. But to me, it had a certain pleasure, and I used the word allure in a little bit of a writing, and that was when the romanticizing a night with candlelight, and what is it to sit and maybe write something or in this different environment.
Right, like Abraham Lincoln or something.
When are we going to be called, and I don't think it's going to take 99%. Personally, I think it would take, I've tried to be neutral or optimistic about it. I feel like if you had, at one point I said 0.007, I was being influenced by James Bond. If people felt, if you just had a group of people, and I think we do, but we need to maybe give more hugs and more support and say, yes, thank you for being the people who do walk, people who do not fly, the people who are putting their lives there in your community on a daily basis. A lot of them may be homeless people. They are not the consumers. They do not need this lifestyle, or they're making these choices. So where is Greta? Where is Bernie? Where is them firing up the American people to have a day of rest, to not go looking elsewhere for your solutions? And the other thing would be these millions of dollars or billions of dollars or trillions of dollars to solve the problem. Doesn't a dollar bill represent energy? I mean, it does. Isn't that exactly what it is?
Sure.
So where is this money coming from to solve the Earth's problem? Well, it would be coming from the Earth, right? It comes from, where does it all start? If we were using our available powers as humans to make the change ourselves, we wouldn't be using taxpayer money, which is taken from business growth, the whole consumption mechanism of the planet. We would not be, let's just say if we did have $20 trillion to solve the problem, would that create a spasm of energy usage? Because it's $20 trillion. You're going to blow that out to save the planet? I'm thinking, this is what's in my mind these days. It's like, when are we going to simply start living our lives like we don't have to be super rich or